You lie here in the dark, and somewhere in the back of your mind, there is a sound you've never actually heard. It isn't a memory, not really. It's more like an inheritance, a ghost frequency passed down through generations until it became part of the static you carry inside you. The sound of bells, not the cheerful jingle of a notification, not the alarm that jolts you awake, but something older, something that once moved across entire valleys, calling people out of their homes, pulling them from their fields, summoning them from the edges of their own solitude into something larger than themselves. You don't think about bells very often. Why would you? They belong to a world that seems increasingly distant, quaint even, like butter churns and handwritten letters. But late at night, or when the scroll becomes mindless and the silence of your room feels less like peace and more like absence, something in you reaches for a sound that no longer exists. Not the sound itself, maybe, but what it represented. A center, a gathering, a reason to stop what you were doing and move toward other people, not because you chose to, but because the world itself was calling. Modern life is full of sounds, of course. Your phone hums and chirps and vibrates with an urgency that never quite feels urgent enough. The city outside your window drones with traffic, construction, the white noise of a million separate lives moving in a million separate directions. You can hear your neighbor's television through the wall, a distant murmur of voices and music that you can't quite make out. But none of it calls to you. None of it says your name. None of it tells you where to be or who to be with or what is happening right now that requires your presence. The bells did that once. They structured time itself. They turned the chaos of individual existence into a rhythm that everyone shared. And now they're gone, mostly, or reduced to nostalgic recordings played for tourists in old town squares, and you're left here in the dark, wondering why it sometimes feels like you're floating in a vast, empty space, tethered to nothing, called by nothing, belonging to nothing but your own restless thoughts. This feeling you carry, this low-grade loneliness that never quite resolves, it isn't new. You know that, intellectually. People have always felt isolated, disconnected, uncertain of their place. But there's something different now, something harder to name. It's not that you lack for connections. You have friends, contacts, followers, people you can message at any hour of the day or night. You can video call someone on the other side of the world, attend virtual gatherings, join communities centered around any interest or identity you can imagine. You are, by every measurable standard, more connected than any human being in history. And yet sometimes you lie here and feel like you're dissolving, like you're made of smoke, and the slightest breeze could scatter you completely. Like there's no structure to hold you in place, no rhythm to move with, no sound that rises up from somewhere beyond yourself to remind you that you exist in relation to something larger, something communal, something that was here before you and will continue after you're gone. The bells represented that. Not perfectly, not without their own forms of coercion and control, but they represented it nonetheless. They said, you are part of this. Your individual time is not entirely your own. Your solitude is temporary. Soon the bells will ring, and you will stop your private work and move toward the center, toward the others, toward the shared space where your personhood meets everyone else's personhood and becomes something different, something communal. You don't have that anymore. You have freedom instead. You have choice. You have the ability to structure your own time, to decide when and where and how you connect with others, to opt in or opt out of any gathering, any obligation, any call that doesn't suit your current mood or schedule. This is what you wanted, isn't it? What your ancestors fought for. The liberation from compulsory gathering, from enforced community, from the tyranny of the bell. But freedom, you're learning, has a texture of its own. It feels light at first, like taking off a heavy coat. But if you wear it long enough, it starts to feel less like lightness and more like weightlessness. Less like liberty and more like drift. You can go anywhere do anything, be anyone, and somehow this infinite possibility has calcified into a strange paralysis. You scroll instead of choosing. You float instead of moving. You wait for something to call you, but nothing does, because you've built a life where nothing is allowed to call you without your permission. The modern world is full of invitations, but they're all optional. Every gathering is provisional. Every commitment is conditional. Every community is voluntary. You can leave whenever you want. You can mute, unfollow, unsubscribe. You can ghost people without explanation, disappear from group chats, decline invitations without offering a reason. This is your right, your prerogative, your boundary. No one can force you into their space. No bell can ring loudly enough to override your individual autonomy. And so you lie here, autonomous and alone, free and unanchored, waiting for a feeling that never quite arrives. The feeling of being needed. Not in the transactional sense, not because you provide some service or fulfill some role, but needed in the way a body is needed to make a circle complete. Needed because when the bells ring, there is a space where you stand. And if you're not standing in it, the space remains empty, and everyone knows you're not there, and your absence is felt. You try to remember the last time your absence was felt. Really felt. Not missed in a sentimental way, not, oh, it would have been nice if you were there, but felt as a disruption, an incompleteness, a hole in the fabric of a gathering that couldn't quite proceed without you. You try to remember the last time you were part of something where your presence wasn't optional, where you couldn't simply not show up without consequence, where the structure of the thing itself depended on you being there. It's been a while, hasn't it? This is the trade you've made, whether you fully understood it or not. You've traded the weight of obligation for the lightness of option. You've traded the constraint of communal rhythm for the freedom of personal schedule. You've traded the sound of the bells for the silence of self-determination. And most of the time, this seems like a good deal. Most of the time, you're grateful for it. You don't want to live in a world where your time isn't your own, where your presence is compulsory, where you have to show up whether you want to or not. But then, there are nights like this. Nights when the freedom feels less like power and more like abandonment. When the silence feels less like peace and more like absence. When you realize that what you're missing isn't the past itself, with all its hardship and constraint, but something the past gave people that you no longer have. A place, a position, a point in a constellation of other points. A reason to be somewhere that exists outside of your own desire to be there. The bells provided that. They were arbitrary, in a sense. So there was no cosmic reason why they had to ring at those particular times, no divine mandate that said this is the hour when humans must gather. But their arbitrariness was part of their power. They imposed a structure that no one had chosen, but everyone shared. They created synchronization. When you heard the bells, you knew that everyone else was hearing them too. You knew that all across the valley, people were stopping what they were doing, setting down their tools, closing their books, rising from their chairs, preparing to move toward the center. You were part of a wave, a simultaneous movement of bodies responding to the same sound. There is no equivalent to this in your life now. Nothing rings that you don't personally choose to answer. Nothing calls that you haven't subscribed to. Nothing summons that you can't ignore. This is freedom, and freedom is good, and you don't want to go back. You really don't. But lying here in the dark, you can almost hear something. Not the bells themselves, but the silence where the bells used to be. The empty frequency. The missing call. And you wonder what it would feel like to live in a world where something larger than yourself could still reach you. Where something beyond your personal preference could still move you. Where you could be called, really called, not invited or suggested or notified, but called, and where not answering would mean something, would cost something, would be felt. You don't want coercion. You don't want to surrender your autonomy. You don't romanticize the past or wish for a return to older forms of social control. But you do want, sometimes, desperately, biz to feel like you're part of a pattern that exists independently of your own will. To know that there are rhythms in the world that will continue whether you participate or not, but that are enriched by your participation. That need you not because you're special or irreplaceable, but because you're there. Because you're a body in the circle. Because the gathering is made of individuals and you're one of them. The bells said, it's time. Not time for you, personally. Not time according to your schedule or preference. Just time. Time for everyone. Time for the community. Time to set aside your individual concerns and remember that you exist in a web of other existences. Time to stop being alone. You're alone so much now. Even when you're with others, you're alone. Even when you're talking and laughing and sharing space. Part of you is held back, withheld, protected behind the boundary of your individuality. You come to gatherings as a complete, self-contained unit. You bring your whole self, as people say, but your whole self is bounded, defended, sovereign. You don't dissolve into the gathering. You don't let the gathering reshape you. You attend, but you don't quite arrive. The bells invited a different kind of presence. When you walked toward the church or the town square or whatever structure stood at the center of your community, you were walking toward something that would temporarily dissolve your individuality into something larger. You are moving from the realm of personal time into the realm of shared time, from private space into communal space, from the sovereignty of self into the democracy of gathering. This dissolution was temporary. Of course, after the bells stopped and the service ended and the gathering dispersed, you would return to yourself, to your own concerns, to your private time. But for that period, for that hour or two, you were part of something that wasn't about you. That couldn't be about you because it was about everyone. Your preferences didn't matter. Your mood didn't matter. Whether you felt like being there didn't matter. You were there because it was time, because the bells had rung, because this is what people did. There was a violence in this, certainly, a kind of pressure. The bells didn't ask. They demanded. And not answering them, not showing up when they called, marked you as different, suspect, possibly dangerous. The communal rhythm enforced itself through social pressure, through the weight of expectation, through the quiet surveillance of neighbors who noticed when you weren't there. This wasn't innocent. This wasn't pure. The bells were instruments of conformity, as much as they were instruments of community. But they were also something else. They were a promise, a guarantee, a commitment that the community made to itself. By ringing the bells, by maintaining the rhythm, by ensuring that the gathering would happen whether any particular individual wanted it or not. The community was saying, we will not let you disappear. We will not let you drift away into complete isolation. We will call you back again and again, whether you like it or not, because your presence matters. Not because of who you are necessarily, but because of what you are. A person, a member, a body that belongs to this particular constellation of bodies. You don't have this anymore? You have invitations instead, suggestions, proposals. Every gathering in your life is contingent on enough people wanting to attend, on enough people choosing to show up, on enough people feeling like it's worth their time. And if they don't feel like it, the gathering simply doesn't happen. There's no compulsion. There's no guarantee. There's just a collection of individuals, each deciding for themselves whether this particular use of their time aligns with their current priorities. And increasingly, it doesn't. Increasingly, people stay home. Increasingly, the gatherings that do happen feel thin, uncertain, haunted by the absence of everyone who chose not to come. You can feel it when you're there, the way the space seems too large for the number of bodies, the way conversation feels forced, performative, as if everyone is trying to justify the decision to show up by having a good enough time, as if the gathering itself is always on trial, always having to prove that it was worth the effort. The bells didn't make this argument. They didn't have to justify themselves. They simply rang, and people came, and the gathering happened, and whatever meaning it held emerged from the fact of it happening, from the rhythm of it, from the reliability of it. You could count on it. You could resent it, sure. You could wish you didn't have to go. But you could also count on it. You could know that whatever else changed in your life, whatever private dramas or disasters you were facing, the bells would still ring, and people would still gather, and you would still have a place in that gathering. And for a little while, your individual concerns would be held in the context of something larger. This is what's missing now. Not the specific experience of going to church, not the particular theology or ritual, but the structure itself, the guaranteed gathering, the non-optional community, the place you had to show up to, whether you wanted to or not, and which therefore gave you a place, a position, a space in the world that existed independently of your own desire to occupy it. You think about this sometimes when you're scrolling through photos of other people's gatherings, other people's communities, other people's apparently effortless belonging. You wonder what it would take to create that in your own life. You make plans. You reach out. You suggest getting together, meeting up, making time. And sometimes it happens. And sometimes it's nice. But it never quite has the weight you're looking for. It never quite feels inevitable. It always feels like it could just as easily not have happened. Like everyone involved is doing you a favor by showing up. Like the gathering exists only because enough people wanted it to, and could stop existing the moment they stop wanting it. There's no bell anymore, no external structure, no rhythm imposed from beyond the circle of individual wills. Just a collection of people, each carrying their own schedule, their own priorities, their own carefully guarded autonomy. And you wouldn't want to give that up. You really wouldn't. The freedom is real. The liberation is real. The ability to say no, to set boundaries, to protect your own time and energy, these are genuine goods. But the cost is real too. The weightlessness is real. The drift is real. The sense that you're floating in space with nothing to hold on to, no structure to move with, no rhythm to surrender to, this is real too. And late at night, when you can't sleep, when the silence of your room feels vast and cold, when you scroll through your phone looking for some connection that never quite satisfies, you find yourself reaching for something you've never experienced. A sound that could gather you. A call that could move you. A belonging that didn't depend on your constant effort to maintain it. The bells are gone now mostly. And you don't want them back. Not really. You don't want to return to a world of compulsory church attendance and social surveillance and enforced conformity. You understand what was oppressive about that world, what was stifling, what had to change. But you also feel, sometimes, the shape of what was lost. Not the specific forms, not the particular institutions, but something more fundamental. The experience of being called, of having a place in the world that existed whether you chose it or not, of being part of a pattern that could hold you even when you couldn't hold yourself. This is what you're missing. Not the past itself, but what the past provided. A structure for belonging, a guarantee of community, a rhythm that synchronized individual lives into something larger, something that no single person had to create or maintain through force of will. Something that simply was, the way the seasons are, the way day and night are. Something you could surrender to because it was bigger than you and older than you and would continue without you, but was also incomplete without you. The bells rang and you knew, yet you knew it was time. You knew what to do. You knew where to go. You knew who would be there. You knew your place. And that knowing, that certainty, that structure, it gave you something that freedom alone cannot provide. It gave you a home in time itself, a position in the rhythm of the world, a way of being human that didn't require constant negotiation, constant choice, constant effort to maintain. You lie here in the dark, and the silence is complete. No bells ring. Nothing calls. The night stretches out in every direction, unstructured, infinite, full of possibility, and empty of requirement. You are free, completely free. Free to sleep or not sleep. Free to rise or not rise. Free to answer or not answer. Free to join or not join. Free to belong or not belong. And in this freedom, you feel yourself becoming lighter and lighter, untethered and unbound, floating up and away from anything that could hold you down. And some part of you, some old animal part that remembers when humans lived in tribes and circles and couldn't survive alone, that part is reaching for something, listening for something, waiting for something. A sound that once moved across valleys and pulled people out of their separate lives into something shared. A sound that said, "You are not alone. You are part of this. It's time. Come." But the bells don't ring anymore. And in their absence, you've learned to make your own time, choose your own rhythm, create your own meaning. You've learned to be sovereign and self-sufficient and independent. You've learned to be free. And on good days, this feels like enough. On good days, the freedom is exhilarating. On good days, you wouldn't trade it for anything. But on nights like this, when sleep won't come and the silence feels infinite, you understand something about your ancestors that you didn't understand before. You understand why they built the bell towers so high, why they cast the bells so large, why they rang them loud enough to reach every corner of the valley. They weren't trying to control people, not entirely. They were trying to prevent exactly this dissolution, this drift, this slow disappearance into the separate darknesses of individual rooms. They were trying to create a center that could hold, a call that could reach, a sound that could gather everyone, at least for a little while, into something larger than their own private existence. And now that sound is gone, and you lie here in its absence, sovereign and alone, free and unmoored, choosing everything and called by nothing. This is the world you've inherited. This is the trade that was made, and you live with it because you have to, because you can't go back, because freedom once tasted cannot be unlearned. But sometimes, late at night, you let yourself wonder. What would it feel like to hear them? The bells, real bells, ringing across a real valley, calling real people out of their real homes into a real gathering. Not because they chose to come, not because it fit their schedule or aligned with their values or met their current needs, but simply because it was time, because the bells were ringing, because this is what people do. What would it feel like to be called like that? To have your presence assumed, expected, required? To be part of a rhythm larger than yourself? To surrender, just for a moment, the exhausting sovereignty of constant choice? You'll never know. The bells don't ring anymore. Not for you. Not for anyone. The towers still stand in some places, tourist attractions now, their bells silent or rung only on special occasions. Heritage performances for people who have no memory of what it meant to live under their rhythm. The sound that once structured entire communities has become an artifact, a curiosity, a symbol of a world that no longer exists. And you've gained so much in losing them. You really have. Your time is your own now. Your life is your own. Your choices are your own. No external authority can demand your presence, structure your days, impose its rhythm on your private existence. This is progress. This is liberation. This is what it means to be modern, to be free, to be an individual. But lying here in the dark, feeling the weight of your own autonomy, the burden of your own freedom, the responsibility of constantly choosing and constantly creating and constantly maintaining your own meaning, you understand something. You understand that humans are not built for this kind of sovereignty. Not completely, not all the time. We're built for rhythm and structure and belonging. We're built to hear the call and move toward it. We're built to have a place in something larger than ourselves. And when we lose that, When the bells fall silent and the gathering becomes optional and community becomes something we have to constantly choose and create and maintain through force of will, something in us starts to fade. Not all at once, not dramatically, just slowly, quietly, like a fire burning down, like a voice calling across an increasingly vast distance, like a sound that once filled an entire valley, now reduced to a faint echo that you're not even sure you're really hearing. This is where you are. This is what you're feeling. Not homesickness for a past you never lived, not nostalgia for a world you wouldn't actually want to return to, but something deeper, something harder to name, a longing for the structure that once held people in place, for the rhythm that once synchronized their movements, for the sound that once called them out of their solitude and into something shared. The bells that knew your name. Not literally, of course. The bells didn't know anyone's name, but they called everyone equally. They called the faithful and the skeptical, the eager and the reluctant, the devoted and the doubtful. And they called without discrimination, without judgment, without requiring you to have your act together or feel the right way or be in the right mood. They just called. And in calling, they created a space where you belonged, not because of who you were, but because you were there. Because you answered. Because you showed up. You don't show up anymore. Not really. You attend things, sure. You participate. You connect. But there's always an opt-out. Always an escape hatch. Always the possibility of simply not being there, of choosing differently, of protecting your time and energy for something else. And this protection, this preservation of self, it feels necessary, it feels wise, it feels like self-care, but it also feels lonely. God, it feels lonely. To always be choosing, to always be negotiating, to always be managing your own presence, your own boundaries, your own participation, to never simply surrender to a rhythm that's larger than you, to never be gathered by something you didn't choose, to never show up somewhere simply because it's time, because the bells are ringing, because this is what people do. The modern world asks so much of you. It asks you to create your own meaning, structure your own time, build your own community, maintain your own connections, choose your own values, design your own life. It gives you freedom, and then asks you to bear the full weight of that freedom alone. It removes the structures that once held people in place, and then wonders why everyone feels so untethered, so anxious, so exhausted by the constant effort of self-creation. And you do feel exhausted. You feel it in your bones. Not the exhaustion of physical labor or long hours. Geez, but something deeper. The exhaustion of always having to be the source of your own structure, of always having to create the meaning, of always having to reach out, plan, organize, maintain, of never being able to simply rest in a pattern that exists independently of your will. The bells provided that rest. That's what you're missing. Not the specific theology or ritual or community, but the rest of being held by something larger. The relief of surrendering, just for a moment, to a rhythm that wasn't yours to create or maintain. The peace of having a place in the world that existed whether you chose it or not. But that peace came at a cost, and you know it. The bells didn't just call. They demanded. They coerced. They enforced. They punished absence and rewarded presence. They created a community that could be stifling, oppressive, and judgmental, cruel. They gave people a place in the world, yes, but they also limited what that place could be. They synchronized lives, but they also homogenized them. They created belonging, but they also created conformity. This is the contradiction at the heart of your longing. You want the structure without the coercion, the belonging without the conformity, the rhythm without the rigidity. You want to be called without being controlled. You want to have a place without being put in your place. You want the benefits of the bells without the cost of the bells. And this, of course, is impossible. The bells worked precisely because they didn't ask permission. They worked because they were non-optional. They created community precisely by overriding individual choice. Take away the coercion, and you take away the certainty. And make the gathering optional, and you make it fragile. Give people the freedom to choose, and you give them the freedom to choose not to. This is what you're living with: the consequences of freedom, the cost of liberation, the weight of autonomy. And most of the time, you're grateful for it. Most of the time, you wouldn't trade it. Most of the time, you understand that the past, with all its structure and rhythm and guaranteed belonging, was also suffocating and limited and oppressive in ways you can barely imagine. But there are nights like this, nights when the freedom feels less like power and more like abandonment. When you lie here in the dark and feel yourself dissolving into pure potential, unformed and uncalled, free to be anything and therefore somehow nothing. And in these moments, you understand your ancestors differently. You understand why they built their lives around those bells, why they let the sound structure their days, why they surrendered their time, their autonomy, their individual preferences to a rhythm they didn't create and couldn't control. They weren't stupid. They weren't naive. They weren't unaware of the costs. They knew what they were giving up. They knew the price of belonging. But they also knew something you're only beginning to understand. They knew that humans can't bear too much freedom. They knew that structure isn't just constraint, it's also support. They knew that being called is also being held, that having obligations is also having place, that surrendering to a rhythm larger than yourself is also being carried by that rhythm. And so they built the towers high and cast the bells large and rang them loud enough to reach every corner of the valley. They created a sound that could gather everyone, that could synchronize their movements, that could pull them out of their separate existences and into something shared. And for centuries, it worked. The bells rang and people came. They didn't always want to. They didn't always feel like it. But they came. And in coming, they created something. A community. A gathering. A pattern of being human together that gave everyone a place. Now the bells are silent, and each person creates their own pattern, and the cost of this freedom is becoming clear. Not because freedom is bad, but because humans are not built to be completely sovereign. We're social animals. We're herd creatures. We need to be called and gathered and held by something larger than ourselves. We need rhythms we don't create. We need structures we don't maintain. We need belonging that doesn't depend entirely on our constant effort and choice. But we don't have that anymore. We have options instead. Invitations, suggestions, a marketplace of possible communities, each competing for our time and attention, each offering belonging on a voluntary basis, each contingent on our continued choice to participate. And this marketplace is vast and diverse and full of possibility. You can find your people, build your tribe, create your own meaning. The modern world offers you this freedom, but it also leaves you here, alone in the dark, scrolling through your phone, wondering why none of it feels quite real, why none of it has the weight you're looking for, why all these voluntary communities and chosen families and curated connections somehow feel thinner, more fragile, more contingent than the communities your ancestors knew. Communities they didn't choose. Communities structured by bells they didn't control. Communities that held them whether they wanted to be held or not. This is the paradox you're living in. You have more freedom than any humans in history, and you feel more untethered. You have more options for connection, and you feel more alone. You have more control over your own life, and you feel less held by the world. The liberation is real, but so is the loss, and you can't untangle them. You can't have one without the other. Freedom means the bells don't ring anymore. Freedom means nothing calls you that you haven't chosen to answer. Freedom means you float in space, be sovereign and alone, with nothing to hold you down. And maybe this is simply what it means to be modern. Maybe this restlessness, this yearning for structures you wouldn't actually want to live under, this longing for bells that you're grateful have fallen silent, Maybe this is just the permanent condition of contemporary life. Maybe you'll always feel this tension between your desire for freedom and your need for structure, between your gratitude for liberation and your longing for rhythm, between your celebration of autonomy and your hunger for belonging. Maybe there's no resolution. Maybe you just learn to live with it. Learn to carry the contradiction. Learn to be grateful for your freedom while also grieving what it cost. Learn to create your own structures while also missing the structures that once existed independently of anyone's creation. Learn to choose your communities while also remembering when community wasn't something you chose, but something you simply belonged to, like you belonged to the valley, like you belonged to the sound of the bells. You take a breath. The room is dark. The night is deep. Somewhere in the distance, you can hear traffic. That perpetual hum of modern life. Movement without destination, sound without meaning. It's not the bells. It will never be the bells. But it's the sound you have, the sound of your time, the sound of a world where everyone is moving, but no one is being called, where everyone is connected, but no one is gathered, where everyone is free and everyone is alone. And you live in this world. You are of this world. You wouldn't trade it for the past, even if you could. You wouldn't give up your freedom, your autonomy, your right to choose. You wouldn't want the bells to ring again. Not really. Not with all their implications. Not with all their costs. You understand what had to change. You understand why it changed. You understand that liberation is real and valuable and worth protecting. But you also understand, lying here in the dark, what was lost. Not the specific forms, not the particular institutions, but something more fundamental. The experience of being called, the feeling of being held, the knowledge that you had a place in the world that existed independently of your own constant effort to create and maintain it. The sound that could reach across an entire valley and gather everyone into something larger than their individual lives. That sound is gone now. And in its place is silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of absence. The silence where a call once rang out. The silence of a world that has forgotten how to gather its people, how to synchronize their movements, how to create belonging that doesn't depend entirely on voluntary choice. You close your eyes. The darkness is complete. And somewhere in the back of your mind, in that place where inherited memories live, you can almost hear it. The faintest echo. The ghost of a sound that once moved across valleys and called people home. Not to a building, necessarily. Not to a specific theology or ritual. But to each other. To community. To the experience of being human together. In rhythm, in time, in a pattern that no one had to create because it simply was. The bells that knew your name. They don't ring anymore. And you're free now. Completely free. And that freedom sometimes feels exactly like falling. But let's go back. Not all the way back. Not to some imagined paradise or golden age, but just far enough to understand what the bells actually did. What they created. What they structured. Not because you want to return there, but because understanding what was lost helps you understand what you're feeling now. Lying here in the dark, reaching for something you can't quite name. Imagine you're standing in a village. Not a large town, not a city, just a collection of homes scattered across a valley, connected by dirt roads and stone walls and centuries of shared life. It's early morning. You've been awake for hours already, because morning on a farm doesn't wait for your readiness. The animals need tending. The crops need attention. The work is endless and unforgiving and has to be done whether you slept well or poorly, whether you feel up to it or not. Your body aches. It always aches. This is normal. This is life. You're 25 years old and your back hurts and your hands are calloused and you've already lost 2 teeth and you'll probably die before you're 50. This is simply how things are. You don't think about it much. You don't have the luxury of thinking about it. There's too much work to do. But then, rising up from the center of the valley, You hear it. The first bell, low and deep, resonating across the hills, cutting through the morning cold, reaching you where you stand in your field. You straighten up. You set down your tools. Not because you want to, particularly. Not because you feel moved or inspired or called by God, but because this is what you do. This is what everyone does. The bell is ringing. It's Sunday. Time to stop working. Time to wash your hands. Time to change into your slightly less dirty clothes. Time to walk toward the center. You don't hurry. No one hurries. This is a processional, not a sprint. All across the valley, people are doing the same thing you're doing. Setting down tools, closing doors, emerging from homes and workshops and fields. Some of them you'll greet on the road. Some of them you'll just nod to. Some of them you don't particularly like. But you're all moving in the same direction, pulled by the same sound, synchronized by a rhythm that none of you created, but all of you share. This isn't optional. Now understand. This isn't a choice you're making in any meaningful sense. Oh, you could technically stay home. You could refuse to go. But then what? Then you're the person who doesn't come to church. Then you're the person who stands out. Then you're suspect, different, possibly dangerous. The social pressure is enormous. The consequences of non-conformity are real. So you go. You go because everyone goes. You go because this is what people do. But here's what's complicated. What's easy to miss from your vantage point centuries later? The coercion and the comfort are inseparable. Yes, you're being compelled. Yes, you don't have real choice. Yes, the bells are instruments of social control. But they're also something else. They're a promise. They're saying, you don't have to organize this. You don't have to plan this. You don't have to reach out to everyone and convince them to come. You don't have to wonder if anyone will show up. The gathering will happen. It happens every week. It's as reliable as the seasons. And you have a place in it. You walk up the hill toward the church. Others join you. Some you know well, some you barely know. There's the farmer whose land borders yours. There's the blacksmith who shoes your horse. There's the widow who lives alone on the edge of the village. There's the family with too many children and not enough food. There's the merchant who thinks he's better than everyone else. There's the young woman you've been trying not to think about. All of you, moving together, called by the same sound. The church isn't beautiful, not by later standards. It's stone and cold and smells like mildew and centuries of human bodies. The pews are hard. The service is long. The priest speaks in Latin that you don't understand. You're tired. You're hungry. You'd rather be home. You've been up since before dawn, and you'll be up tomorrow before dawn, and the work never ends, and your body hurts, and you're not even sure you believe in most of what's being said. But you're here, and so is everyone else. And for this hour, for this period of time, your individual concerns are suspended. You're not a farmer, or a blacksmith, or a merchant. You're not worried about your crops, or your debts, or your sick child. You're just here, present, part of this gathering. One body among many bodies, all of you sitting in the same cold church, all of you hearing the same words, all of you moving through the same ritual that your parents moved through and their parents before them. There's a comfort in this that's hard to explain to someone who's never experienced it. It's not about belief, not really. It's not even about community in the warm, fuzzy sense. It's about structure. It's about knowing where you're supposed to be and when you're supposed to be there. It's about not having to create meaning or organize connection or maintain belonging through constant effort. It's about surrendering to a rhythm that's larger than you, older than you, that will continue after you're gone. The service ends. You file out. You stand in the churchyard. You talk to people you wouldn't otherwise talk to. You hear news. You make arrangements. You conduct business. You gossip. You argue. You laugh. You remember that you're part of something larger than your own field, your own family, your own private concerns. Yes, you're part of this village, this valley, this web of relationships that the bells have gathered into one place. Then you go home. You go back to work. You return to your private concerns. The comfort fades. The connection loosens. By tomorrow, you'll be back in your field, alone with your aching body and endless work, and the gathering will feel distant, almost unreal. But you know it will happen again, next Sunday. Same time, same place, same bells. You'll be called again. You'll gather again. You'll have a place in it again. This is what the bells provided. Not happiness, not prosperity, not an easier life. Life was hard. Life was often brutal. You worked yourself to exhaustion, buried half your children, watched your body break down decades before you were old. The bells didn't change any of that. And they didn't make the work easier, or the poverty less grinding, or the losses less devastating. But they gave you a structure, a rhythm, a guaranteed gathering. They ensured that no matter how isolated you felt in your daily life, no matter how alone you were with your private griefs and struggles, you would be called back again and again into something communal. You would be reminded again and again that you were part of something larger than yourself. You would have a place again and again in a pattern that didn't depend on your personal desire or effort to maintain. And here's what's crucial. What you need to understand as you lie here in your comfortable bed, in your climate-controlled room in your free and modern life. This structure, this rhythm, this guaranteed gathering, it did something to people. It shaped them. It formed them. Not always in good ways, certainly. It created conformity and enforced orthodoxy and punished difference. But it also created a different relationship to belonging. People didn't have to work so hard to maintain it. They didn't have to constantly reach out, make plans, organize connection. The structure did that for them. The bells did that for them. The rhythm did that for them. You knew you would see people. You knew when and where. You knew you had a place in that gathering. You might not like everyone there. You might find the service boring and the priest tedious and the whole thing a chore. But you didn't have to create it. You didn't have to maintain it. You just had to show up. And showing up was not optional, which meant it was also not your responsibility. You didn't have to motivate yourself. You didn't have to overcome inertia. You didn't have to negotiate with yourself about whether you felt like it. You went because the bells rang. That's all. Compare this to your life now. Every gathering is something you have to choose. Every connection is something you have to maintain. Every community is something you have to actively participate in. And if you stop choosing, stop maintaining, stop participating, it all just dissolves. The structure doesn't hold you. The rhythm doesn't carry you. There are no bells to call you back. This means you have freedom, yes. You can choose not to go. You can protect your time and energy. You can set boundaries. But it also means you have to do all the work. You have to be the source of your own structure. You have to create and maintain all your connections through constant effort. And you have to motivate yourself to overcome the inertia of isolation. You have to negotiate with yourself constantly about whether any particular gathering is worth the effort. And this is exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. Not in a way you can easily explain to others. Not in a way that shows up as a specific problem you can solve. But exhausting nonetheless. The constant effort of self-motivation. The constant negotiation with your own resistance. The constant work of reaching out, making plans, maintaining connections. The constant awareness that every gathering is contingent, fragile, dependent on everyone involved continuing to choose it. Your ancestors didn't have to do this work. The bells did it for them. The structure held them. The rhythm carried them. They didn't have to create belonging. They just had to show up to it. Why, and yes, this came at a cost. Yes, it was coercive. Yes, it limited freedom. But it also provided something you no longer have. Guaranteed community. Reliable gathering. Structure that existed independently of individual will. You lie here and feel the absence of that structure. You feel the weight of your own freedom. You feel the exhausting responsibility of constantly creating and maintaining your own meaning, your own connection, your own belonging. And you understand, maybe for the first time, why your ancestors built their lives around those bells. Not because they were naive or oppressed or lacking in individuality, but because they understood something about human nature that modern life has forgotten. They understood that humans need structure, that we need rhythm, that we need to be called and gathered by something larger than ourselves. That belonging maintained entirely through individual choice is fragile and exhausting and ultimately unsustainable. That community requires some element of compulsion, some override of personal preference, some structure that holds people even when they don't feel like being held. The bells provided that structure, and now they're gone, and you have freedom in their place. Freedom to choose, freedom to opt out, freedom to protect your time and energy, freedom to create your own meaning. This freedom is real and valuable. You wouldn't trade it, not really. But you also feel its cost. You feel the absence of structure. You feel the weight of constant choice. You feel the exhaustion of maintaining belonging through individual effort alone. This is the trade that was made. This is the world you've inherited. And there's no going back. The bells can't ring again, not in the way they once did. The structure they provided depended on a kind of social cohesion and religious authority that no longer exists. The modern world has fractured into too many different beliefs, too many different values, too many different ways of being human. There's no single sound that could call everyone anymore. No single gathering that could hold everyone. No single rhythm that everyone shares. So you learn to live with it. You learn to be your own bell. You learn to create your own structure. You learn to reach out and make plans and maintain connections through constant effort. You learn to be free and exhausted, autonomous and alone, sovereign and untethered. This is what it means to be modern. Thus, this is the condition you navigate every day. But understanding the past, understanding what the bells provided, this helps you understand your own longing. You're not being irrational. You're not romanticizing oppression. You're not wishing for a return to social control. You're just feeling the absence of structure, the cost of freedom, the weight of belonging maintained entirely through individual choice and effort. And maybe, understanding this, you can be a little gentler with yourself, a little more patient with your restlessness, a little more forgiving of your loneliness. You're not failing at modern life. You're not doing it wrong. You're just living with the consequences of liberation. You're just feeling the shape of what was lost when you gained so much. The bells rang. Everyone came. You had a place. It wasn't always comfortable. It wasn't always wanted. It wasn't always good. But it was there. Reliable, certain, guaranteed. And now it's not. And you're free. And freedom has a cost that no one warned you about. The cost of being your own bell. The cost of creating your own structure. The cost of maintaining your own belonging. The cost of freedom. The hardest thing to explain about the bells is how little they had to do with belief. You can hear about church bells and immediately think this is about religion, about faith, about God. And yes, the bells hung in church towers. Yes, they called people to services. Yes, they were wrapped up in theology and doctrine and all the structures of organized religion. But for most people, most of the time, the bells weren't really about any of that. They were about time. In a world without clocks on every wall and devices in every pocket, the bells told you what time it was. Not just the hour, but the kind of time. Morning bells, noon bells, evening bells, Sunday bells, holy day bells, funeral bells, wedding bells. Each had its own rhythm, its own pattern, its own meaning. You learned to read time through sound. You organized your life around these auditory markers. The bells told you when to start work, when to stop, when to eat, when to gather, when to mourn, when to celebrate. This was practical, essential even. But it was also something more. The bells created a shared experience of time. When you heard them, you knew everyone else was hearing them too. You knew that all across the valley, people were stopping what they were doing, looking up, orienting themselves to the same moment. The bells synchronized not just schedules, but consciousness itself. They created a collective present tense. You don't have this anymore. You have time, certainly. You have more accurate time than anyone in history. You have atomic clocks and GPS satellites and devices that measure time down to the nanosecond. But you don't have shared time. You don't have collective time. Your phone tells you what time it is, but only you hear it. When you look at your clock, you're looking alone. Your experience of time is private, individual, unsynchronized with anyone else's. This might seem like a small thing. What difference does it make if everyone hears the time announced collectively versus checking it individually? But the difference is profound. The bells didn't just tell you what time it was. They told you what time it was for everyone. They created a collective moment, a shared now, an experience of being in time together, rather than each person inhabiting their own private timeline. Think about what this feels like. You're working in your field. You're absorbed in the task, lost in the rhythm of physical labor, unaware of anything but the immediate present of your body and your work. Then the bells ring. Suddenly you're not just in your private present anymore. You're in the collective present. You're connected through sound to every other person in the valley. You know they're hearing this too. You know they're stopping too. You know they're all moving toward the same moment, the same place, the same gathering. This is different from getting a notification on your phone. Yes, you might receive the same message as other people. And you might all be alerted to the same event, but you experience it individually. You read it alone. You decide alone whether to respond. Your experience of the notification is separate from everyone else's experience of it. It doesn't create a collective moment. It creates a series of individual moments that happen to have the same content. The bells created something else. They created simultaneity, collective consciousness, shared time. And in creating this, they created a different kind of social fabric, a web of mutual awareness that didn't depend on direct communication or individual choice. Just by hearing the bells, you were connected to everyone else who heard them. Just by knowing that everyone was hearing them, you were part of a collective experience. This might sound mystical or romanticized, but it's not. It's simply describing a different infrastructure for social connection. The bells were technology, just like your phone, but they were collective technology. They didn't connect individuals to individuals. They connected everyone to everyone simultaneously through a shared sensory experience. They created what you might call ambient community, connection that existed in the background that you didn't have to actively create or maintain, that simply arose from the fact of sharing space and time and sound. You don't have this anymore. You have targeted, individualized, customizable connection. You can reach anyone, anytime, anywhere. You can form communities around the most specific interests and identities. You can curate your social world with precision. This is powerful. This is liberating. But it's also isolating, in a way that's hard to articulate. Because all your connections are direct now. One-to-one or one-to-group. They're intentional, chosen, maintained through effort. There's no ambient community anymore. No background field of connection that you inhabit without choosing to. No shared sensory experience that links you to everyone in your geographic space. You're only connected to the people you deliberately connect with. Everyone else is just noise, bodies moving through space, irrelevant to your life, unless you choose to make them relevant. The bells created a different way of being in space together. When you walked through your village, you weren't just walking past strangers. You were walking past people who heard what you heard, who moved to the same rhythm, who shared your experience of time. You didn't have to know them personally. You didn't have to interact with them, but you were connected to them nonetheless, through this shared auditory experience, through this collective response to the same sound. This created a kind of trust that's almost impossible to explain to modern people. Not trust in the sense that you believed everyone was good or safe, but trust in the sense that you were all part of the same system. You were all responding to the same cues. You were all organized by the same structure. This created predictability, reliability, a sense that you understood how the social world worked even when you didn't understand the individuals in it. Compare this to how you move through the world now. You walk through your city or town surrounded by people, but you're not connected to them. They're not responding to the same cues you're responding to. They're not part of your system. They're just individuals, each following their own private timeline, their own personal schedule, their own invisible notifications. You have no idea what they're doing or why. You have no shared structure that makes their behavior predictable or comprehensible. They're chaos, noise, bodies in space that have nothing to do with you. This is profoundly different from how your ancestors experienced public space. For them, even strangers were part of a shared structure. Even people they didn't know personally were organized by the same rhythms, called by the same sounds, participating in the same temporal framework. This didn't make everyone friends. It didn't erase conflict or difference. But it created a baseline of shared experience that made the social world feel less chaotic, less random, and less threatening. When the bells rang on Sunday morning, you knew what was happening. Not just for you, but for everyone. You knew they were all doing the same thing you were doing. You knew the streets would fill with people moving in the same direction. You knew the church would be packed. You knew after the service, the square would be full of people standing around talking. You knew the rhythm of it all because everyone moved to the same rhythm. The bells synchronized the social world in a way that made it legible, predictable, comprehensible. Now, nothing is synchronized. Everyone is operating on their own schedule. People work different hours, sleep different times, eat different meals. There's no shared rhythm to public life. No collective moment when everyone is doing the same thing. No sound that organizes everyone's behavior into a predictable pattern. This is freedom, yes. This is flexibility. This is the liberation from enforced synchronization. But it's also chaos. It's also overwhelming. It's also exhausting in a way that's hard to name. Because you have to figure everything out yourself now. You can't rely on collective rhythms to structure your social life. You can't assume that certain times will be busy and others quiet. You can't predict when you'll encounter people or what they'll be doing. The social world has become unpredictable, and managing that unpredictability requires constant attention, constant adjustment, constant effort. The bells managed it for you. They created structure without effort. They synchronized behavior without individual negotiation. They made the social world predictable and legible through shared sound. And yes, this came at a cost. Yes, it constrained freedom. Yes, it enforced conformity. But it also provided something valuable, something you're only now beginning to miss. Ambient order, collective rhythm, a social world that made sense because everyone was responding to the same cues. Lying here in the dark, you can feel the absence of that order. You can feel how much work it takes to navigate a world where nothing is synchronized, where everyone is moving to their own private rhythm, where you can't rely on any collective structure to organize social life. You have to do it all yourself. You have to figure out when to work, when to rest, when to socialize, when to withdraw. You have to constantly check in with others to coordinate schedules. You have to negotiate every gathering, every meeting, every connection. Nothing happens automatically. Nothing is structured by a sound everyone shares. This is exhausting. And the exhaustion isn't really about the specific tasks of coordination. It's about the constant low-level anxiety of navigating an unsynchronized world, of never quite knowing what anyone else is doing or why, of feeling like you're floating in a sea of individuals, each following their own invisible timeline, none of which intersect with yours unless you actively work to make them intersect. The bells created intersections without work. They created collective moments without individual effort. They gave you a shared experience of time that made you feel less alone, less adrift, less lost in a chaos of individual rhythms. And now, that shared experience is gone. And you have freedom and flexibility and individual autonomy. And you also have this constant low-level sense of disconnection, of unsynchronization, of moving through a world where no one is responding to the same cues you're responding to. You check your phone. It's 2:47 a.m. This means nothing to anyone but you. No one else is noting this time. No one else is synchronized to this moment. You're alone in it, as you're alone in every moment, because time has become private and individual and unsynchronized. The bells would have made this moment collective, even in the middle of the night. If they rang for some reason, a fire, an emergency, a death, you would know that everyone was hearing them. Everyone was waking up. Everyone was moving toward the same awareness. You would be alone in your bed, but connected through sound to every other person in the valley. But there are no bells. There's just your phone, glowing in the dark, telling you a time that no one else is noting, marking a moment that belongs only to you. You're free to experience time however you want. Free to create your own schedule. Free to be as synchronous with everyone around you. And in this freedom, you feel the weight of your own isolation, the burden of private time, the exhaustion of navigating a world where nothing is synchronized anymore. The bells told you what time it was, but they also told you something more important. You're in this time with everyone else. You're sharing this moment. You're part of a collective present tense, and that belonging, that connection through shared time, that's what you're missing. Not the specific times the bells announced, but the experience of being in time together, of knowing that your experience of this moment is shared by everyone around you, of feeling, through sound, that you're part of something larger than your own private timeline. But the bells don't ring anymore, and you're alone in time now, free and unsynchronized and exhausted by the constant work of creating connection in a world where nothing is structured to connect you. This is modern life. This is what you've gained and what you've lost. And lying here in the dark, you feel both. The freedom and the isolation. The autonomy and the exhaustion. The private time that belongs only to you. And the longing for a sound that could tell everyone, that it's time. Time to stop being alone. Time to be together. Time. But let's be clear about something. Let's not romanticize this too much. Because while you're lying here feeling the absence of the bells, feeling the weight of your freedom and the exhaustion of your autonomy, you need to remember what life was actually like for the people who lived under their rhythm. You need to remember what that community actually felt like for the people who had no choice but to be part of it. It wasn't warm. It wasn't always supportive. It wasn't the idealized community of modern imagination, where everyone knows your name and cares about your well-being and shows up when you need help. It was often cold, judgmental, and suffocating. The same structure that gave people a place also put them in their place. The same bells that called them to gather also enforced conformity, punished difference, and maintained rigid hierarchies that determined what kind of life you could live based on what family you were born into. You were born into your position. Your father was a farmer, so you were a farmer. Your mother served in the manor house, so you served in the manor house. Your family had always been poor, so you would always be poor. The structure that gave everyone a place was also the structure that prevented almost everyone from changing their place. Social mobility was rare, limited, often impossible. The community that held you also trapped you. And the surveillance was constant. Everyone knew everything about everyone else. This wasn't because people were particularly nosy or cruel, though some certainly were. It was because life was lived in public. You couldn't disappear into your own private space because there wasn't much private space. Your home was small, poorly insulated, shared with multiple family members, and often livestock. Your work was visible to everyone. Your comings and goings were noted. Your absences were remarked upon. Your failures were witnessed. Your struggles were known. This created a kind of accountability that modern people can barely imagine. You couldn't hide. You couldn't pretend. You couldn't curate a version of yourself that was different from who you actually were. People saw you at your worst. They knew about your drinking, your debts, your fights with your spouse, your failures as a parent. They knew because there was no privacy, no way to keep secrets, no ability to maintain a boundary between your public and private self. And they judged. Of course they judged. The same community that gave you a place also held you to rigid standards. If you broke the rules, violated the norms, behaved in ways that the community deemed unacceptable, there were consequences. Social ostracism, economic punishment, public shaming, sometimes violence. The community that held you could also crush you if you stepped too far out of line. So when you feel nostalgic for community, when you long for the structure the bells provided, you need to remember this. You need to remember that the people who lived in that community often felt trapped by it. Many of them would have fled if they could. Some did flee, leaving their villages for cities, for new lands, for anywhere that offered escape from the suffocating surveillance and rigid expectations of communal life. The loneliness you feel now, the isolation, the exhaustion of maintaining connection through individual effort alone, all of this is real and valid. But so was the desire for escape that drove people away from traditional communities. So was the longing for privacy, for autonomy, for the ability to live your life without constant judgment and surveillance. The modern world you inhabit, with all its loneliness and disconnection, was created partly by people who desperately wanted to escape the communities they were born into. This is the paradox. The structures that gave people a place also trapped them in that place. The communities that held them also suffocated them. The bells that called them together also enforced conformity. You can't separate the belonging from the coercion. You can't have the security without the surveillance. You can't enjoy the community without accepting the judgment. And most people, given the choice, chose freedom. They chose privacy. They chose the ability to create their own life, even if it meant being alone. They chose autonomy, even if it meant exhaustion. They chose the possibility of escape, even if it meant losing the security of place. This wasn't because they were wrong or misguided. It was because the cost of traditional community was real and often unbearable. So lying here in your comfortable bed, in your private room, in your autonomous life, you need to hold both truths. You need to acknowledge what was lost when the bells fell silent, but also what was gained. You need to feel your loneliness, but also appreciate your privacy. You need to recognize the exhaustion of creating your own structure, but also the liberation of not being trapped in someone else's structure. Because here's what's true. You wouldn't want to go back. Not really. Not if you actually understood what it meant. Not if you actually had to live under that constant surveillance, that rigid hierarchy, that suffocating conformity. You wouldn't want to have your life determined by the circumstances of your birth. You wouldn't want every failure witnessed and judged. You wouldn't want to be unable to leave, unable to change, unable to become anyone other than who your community expected you to be. You want something impossible. You want the belonging without the coercion. You want the structure without the rigidity. You want the community without the judgment. You want the security of place without being put in your place. You want to be held by something larger than yourself without being constrained by it. You want the bells to call you without controlling you. And this impossible want, this contradictory longing, this is actually what your restlessness is about. It's not really nostalgia for the past. It's frustration with the present. It's the recognition that modern life has solved certain problems. Lack of freedom, lack of privacy, lack of choice. But in solving them has created new problems. Isolation, disconnection, exhaustion, the burden of constant self-creation and self-maintenance. And there's no going back. The bells can't ring again in the way they once did. The old structures can't be resurrected. The traditional communities can't be rebuilt, not authentically, not with the same binding power they once had. Too much has changed. Too much has been gained. Too much freedom has been tasted. You can't unlearn autonomy. You can't unknow privacy. You can't return to a world where your place was given to you rather than something you had to constantly create and maintain. So you're stuck. Stuck between the loneliness of freedom and the memory of belonging. Stuck between the exhaustion of autonomy and the knowledge that dependence was its own kind of suffering. Stuck between wanting structure and refusing constraint. Stuck between longing for community and protecting your privacy. Stuck. And maybe this stuckness, this inability to fully embrace either the past or the present, maybe this is just the permanent condition of being modern. Maybe you'll always feel this tension. Maybe you'll always long for something you wouldn't actually want if you could have it. Maybe you'll always be haunted by the ghost of the bells, even as you're grateful they've fallen silent. This is hard to live with. It's hard to feel this contradiction, to carry this impossible longing, to want things that can't coexist. It would be easier if you could simply reject the past, embrace the present, celebrate your freedom without feeling its costs. It would be easier if you could convince yourself that the old communities were purely oppressive, that nothing valuable was lost, that modern isolation is a small price to pay for liberation. But you can't quite believe that, because you feel what was lost. You feel it in your body, in your restlessness, in your exhaustion, in the way you lie here at night reaching for something you can't name. You feel the absence of structure, the loss of rhythm, the silence where the bells used to be. And no amount of celebrating your freedom makes that absence feel less real. So what do you do with this? How do you live with this contradiction? How do you navigate a world where you're grateful for your liberation, but also mourning what it cost? How do you honor both the longing for belonging and the need for autonomy? How do you acknowledge that the past was both better and worse than the present? That something valuable was lost, even though something even more valuable was gained? You start by being honest, by not pretending that modern life has solved all problems, by not dismissing your loneliness as personal failure, by not gaslighting yourself into believing that freedom should feel better than it does, by acknowledging that liberation always has costs, that solving one set of problems creates new problems, that human existence is always a series of trade-offs rather than a movement toward perfection. The bells provided structure at the cost of freedom. You have freedom at the cost of structure. Neither arrangement is perfect. Neither fully satisfies human needs. You're not wrong for feeling the loss, even as you appreciate the gain. You're not failing at modern life by feeling exhausted by its demands. You're not being nostalgic or regressive by recognizing that something valuable was lost when the old communities dissolved. You're just human. You're just carrying the weight of your own history, your own inheritance, your own position in a long story of human beings, trying to figure out how to live together without destroying each other or themselves. And right now, at this point in the story, you're living with the consequences of a particular set of choices. Choices you didn't make personally, but that shape your life nonetheless. Those choices prioritized individual freedom over collective obligation, privacy over community, autonomy over structure, choice over compulsion. These were good choices, necessary choices, liberating choices, but they came with costs. The costs are real. You feel them. And feeling them doesn't mean you want to go back. It just means you're honest enough to acknowledge what was traded away to get where you are. So you lie here in the dark, holding this contradiction, grateful and lonely, free and exhausted, liberated and untethered. This is your inheritance. This is your position in the story. This is what it means to be modern. And maybe, just maybe, acknowledging this honestly is the first step toward finding a way to live with it. Not to solve it, not to resolve it, but to live with it. To carry the contradiction without letting it crush you. To feel the longing without being consumed by it. To honor what was lost without romanticizing it. To appreciate what was gained without denying its costs. The bells don't ring anymore. You're glad they don't. And you also miss them. Both things are true. Both things can be true. And learning to hold both truths without needing to resolve them into a simpler story, a clearer narrative, a more comfortable conclusion, that might be the only wisdom available to you now. The wisdom of contradiction. The wisdom of holding both. The wisdom of living in the tension between what you've lost and what you've gained. It's getting later now, or earlier, depending on how you measure these things. The night has reached that point where it stops feeling like the continuation of yesterday and starts feeling like the beginning of tomorrow, even though dawn is still hours away. Your body is tired, but your mind won't rest. This happens more often than you'd like. This floating in the dark, thinking in circles, reaching for something that keeps slipping away. Let's come back to what's actually happening right now, in this moment, in your body, in your bed. Let's stop talking about history and community and what was lost and what was gained. Let's just be here, with you, with this feeling you're carrying, this restlessness, this loneliness, this sense that something is missing. What are you actually missing? Not in abstract historical terms, not in theoretical frameworks about community and individualism, but right now, tonight. What is it that you're reaching for? Maybe it's simpler than all the thinking makes it seem. Maybe what you're missing is just the feeling of being expected, of being anticipated, of knowing that somewhere, someone is holding a space for you, not because you asked them to, not because you've worked to maintain the relationship, but just because that's how the structure works. You show up there. They expect you. Your absence would be noticed. When was the last time you felt that? When was the last time you were somewhere where your absence would have been noticed, not just by one person who cares about you, but by a group, a structure, a gathering that would have been different without you? Not because you're special or irreplaceable, but just because you're part of the pattern, and without you, the pattern is incomplete. This is what the bells created. A gathering where everyone was expected, where every absence was noticed. Not because people were surveilling each other, but because the gathering depended on everyone being there. The community was made of individuals, and when individuals were missing, the community felt it. You don't have this anymore. You have relationships where you're wanted, certainly. People who would miss you if you disappeared. But do you have a gathering that expects you? A structure that holds your place? A pattern that would be visibly incomplete without you? Or are all your connections voluntary, optional, maintained through constant effort, capable of dissolving the moment you stop working to maintain them? This might be the core of what you're feeling. Not loneliness in the sense of lacking people who care about you, but loneliness in the sense of lacking structural belonging, of not being part of a pattern that exists independently of your will, of not being expected, anticipated, held in place by something larger than your individual relationships. And you can't create this for yourself. That's the cruel part. Structural belonging can't be voluntary. It can't be something you choose and maintain through effort. The moment it becomes voluntary, it stops being structural. It becomes just another relationship you have to work at, another connection you have to maintain, another thing that will dissolve if you stop putting in the effort. The bells created structural belonging because they weren't optional. The gathering happened whether anyone wanted it to or not. Your place in it existed whether you maintained it or not. You were expected because the structure expected you, not because any individual person expected you. And this structural expectation, this being held in place by something larger than personal relationship, this is what you can't create in modern life. Because everything is optional now. Everything is voluntary. Everything depends on individual choice. There are no structures that hold you without your consent. There are no gatherings that expect you unless you've specifically committed to being there. There's no pattern that includes you unless you actively maintain your place in it. This is freedom. This is autonomy. This is the liberation that makes modern life possible. But it's also exhausting. Because it means you never get to rest. You never get to be held by something larger than yourself. You never get to stop working to maintain your place in the world. Everything requires your constant effort, your constant choice, your constant maintenance. And tonight, lying here in the dark, you're tired of it. You're tired of being the one who has to reach out, make plans, maintain connections. You're tired of knowing that every relationship in your life depends on your ongoing effort to sustain it. You're tired of feeling like you're always working to maintain your place in the world, like the moment you stop working, you'll simply float away into irrelevance. You want to be held, not by a person, not in the romantic sense, but by a structure, by a pattern, by a rhythm that exists independently of your will. You want to stop having to create your own belonging and just rest in belonging that's given to you. You want to be expected without having to earn it. You want to be anticipated without having to ask for it. You want to have a place that exists whether you actively maintain it or not. But this isn't possible anymore. Not in the way you want it. Not in a way that doesn't come with all the coercion and conformity and judgment that made traditional communities suffocating. You can't have the holding without the constraint. You can't have the structure without the limitation. You can't have the belonging without the obligation. So you're left with this longing, this impossible want, this hunger for something that can't exist in the way you need it to. And maybe the kindest thing you can do for yourself is simply acknowledge it. Stop trying to solve it. Stop trying to create voluntary structures that will give you what only non-voluntary structures can give. Stop working so hard to manufacture a kind of belonging that can't be manufactured. Just feel it. Just acknowledge it. Just say to yourself, I want to be held by something larger than myself. I want to stop working so hard to maintain my place in the world. I want to be expected, anticipated, structurally included. I want to rest in belonging rather than constantly creating it. And then acknowledge the next truth. This isn't available to me. Not in the form I want it. Not without costs I'm not willing to pay. The world has changed. The structures that once held people have dissolved. The bells don't ring anymore. And I live in the world that came after them. A world of freedom and exhaustion. A world of autonomy and drift. A world where I have to create everything and maintain everything and work constantly to have a place. This is hard. This is lonely. This is exhausting. And it's also where you are. It's what you're living with. It's the trade that was made long before you were born, by people who were trying to solve different problems, escape different constraints, liberate themselves from different oppressions. You inherited their solution, and their solution created your problem. And you can't solve your problem by returning to their problem. You have to live with the contradiction, the gain and the loss, the freedom and the exhaustion, the autonomy and the loneliness. But maybe acknowledging it helps. Maybe naming it reduces its power slightly. Maybe saying out loud, or even just to yourself in the dark, I miss being held by structures I didn't create. I miss having a place that didn't depend on my constant effort. I miss the bells, even though I'm glad they don't ring anymore. Maybe saying this, maybe admitting this contradiction, maybe this is enough. Not to solve anything, but to release some of the pressure of trying to solve it. Because you've been trying to solve it, haven't you? You've been trying to create voluntary structures that will give you what only involuntary structures can give. You've been trying to manufacture belonging through effort when what you actually want is belonging that exists without effort. You've been trying to solve a structural problem with personal solutions. And it's not working. It can't work. The problem is structural, and personal solutions can't fix structural problems. So maybe you stop trying. Maybe you just rest here in the recognition of what is. You're lonely in a specific way, a way that modern life creates, a way that freedom creates, a way that can't be solved without giving up the freedom which you don't want to do and shouldn't have to do. So you're just lonely. in this particular way, and you'll probably stay lonely in this way. And that's okay. Or if it's not okay, it's at least real. It's at least honest. It's at least true. The bells don't ring anymore. You don't get to be held by structures you didn't create. You don't get to rest in belonging that doesn't require your constant maintenance. You have to create everything. Maintain everything. Work constantly to have a place. This is your world. This is your life. This is what you're working with. And maybe, in acknowledging this clearly, without trying to solve it or fix it or change it, maybe you can find a different kind of peace. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace of acceptance. Not the peace of having what you want, but the peace of knowing clearly what you don't have, and what you can't have, and what you're actually dealing with. You're dealing with the aftermath of liberation. You're dealing with the costs of freedom. You're dealing with the trade that was made centuries ago and that you're still living with. You're dealing with the silence where the bells used to be, and you can't make them ring again. You can only learn to live with their absence, which might mean learning to be lonely in this specific way. Learning to feel the exhaustion of constant self-creation without expecting it to go away. Learning to carry the longing for structural belonging without expecting to satisfy it. Learning to acknowledge the cost without denying the gain. Learning to live with contradiction, with incompleteness, with problems that don't have solutions. This isn't inspiring. This isn't uplifting. This isn't the kind of wisdom that makes you feel better. But it might be true. And truth, even uncomfortable truth, has a kind of relief in it. The relief of stopping the struggle. Stopping the effort to fix what can't be fixed. Stopping the search for solutions to structural problems. Just being with what is. Just feeling what you feel. Just acknowledging the longing without needing to satisfy it. The bells don't ring anymore. And you miss them. And you're glad they don't ring. Both things are true. And both things will probably always be true. And maybe learning to hold both truths without needing to resolve them is the only wisdom available to you. The only peace you can find. Not the peace of having what you want, but the peace of knowing clearly what you want and why you can't have it and what you're actually working with instead. You're working with freedom and loneliness, autonomy and exhaustion, privacy and isolation, the liberation to create your own life, and the burden of creating your own life. This is your inheritance. This is your position. This is the world you're trying to make a life in. And you're doing it. You are making a life. It might not feel like enough sometimes. It might feel thin, fragile, exhausting. But you're doing it. You're here. You're navigating this contradictory world. You're carrying the longing without letting it destroy you. You're acknowledging the loss without denying the gain. You're living with the silence where the bells used to be. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all you can do. Maybe the wisdom isn't in solving the problem, but in learning to live with it. Learning to carry the contradiction. Learning to feel the longing without being consumed by it. Learning to acknowledge the cost without returning to what cost too much in different ways. The bells were beautiful and terrible. Freedom is liberating and exhausting. Community was supportive and suffocating. Isolation is peaceful and lonely. Everything is both. Everything contains its opposite. And you have to learn to live with both sides, the gain and the loss, the freedom and the cost, and the yes and the no, the wanting and the knowing you can't have, the missing and the not wanting to go back. This is what it means to be human in this moment, in this world, in this particular chapter of the human story. You carry the past in your body even as you live in the present. You long for things you're glad you don't have. You miss things you wouldn't want to return to. You're caught in contradiction, and the contradiction doesn't resolve, and maybe it's not supposed to. Maybe you just learn to breathe with it, to let it be there, to stop struggling against it, to acknowledge that, yes, you're lonely in this specific way, and yes, you're also grateful for the freedom that creates this loneliness. And yes, both things are true. And yes, both things will continue to be true. And yes, this is hard. And yes, you're living with it anyway. Because what choice do you have? The bells don't ring. You can't make them ring. You can only learn to live in their absence, to feel what you feel, to carry what you carry, to acknowledge the shape of what was lost without pretending it was all gain or all loss, to hold the complexity, to sit with the contradiction, to be human in a world that was trying to solve old problems and created new ones, to be alive now, in this moment, with this particular burden and this particular freedom. The night is deep. Your body is tired. Your mind is quieter now, maybe, having circled through all of this, having named what needed naming, having acknowledged what needed acknowledging. You're still lonely. You're still exhausted. You're still carrying the weight of your own autonomy. But maybe you're carrying it a little differently now, a little more consciously, a little more accepting of what is, rather than what you wish could be. The bells don't ring anymore. And you're here, in their absence, learning to make a life in the silence, learning to create structure where none is given, learning to reach for connection in a world that doesn't gather you automatically, learning to be modern, which means learning to be free and lonely, autonomous and exhausted, grateful and grieving, all at the same time. This is your work. This is your life. This is what you're doing, even when it doesn't feel like enough, even when you lie here at night reaching for something that isn't there, even when you're tired of creating and maintaining and working constantly to have a place. You're doing it anyway. You're making a life in the silence where the bells used to be. You're creating belonging in a world that doesn't give it to you. You're carrying the contradiction without letting it break you. And maybe that's not nothing. Maybe that's actually something. Maybe the work of being human in this moment is exactly this: carrying what you carry, feeling what you feel, acknowledging what's lost while living with what's gained, making a life in the space between what you want and what's available. The bells don't ring. You miss them and you're glad they don't ring. And you keep going anyway, into the night, into the silence, into the complicated freedom of modern life. You keep going because you're here, because this is your time, because this is what it means to be alive now, in this world, in this particular moment of human history. You're part of a long story of people trying to figure out how to live together and apart, how to balance freedom and belonging, how to create meaning in a world that doesn't give it to you automatically. And your chapter of the story is this: learning to live without the bells, learning to make structure in their absence, learning to carry the longing without being destroyed by it. This is hard work, invisible work, work that no one sees or celebrates or even necessarily understands. But it's your work. It's what you're doing. It's how you're making your life. And maybe in the quiet of this late night, in the honesty of your exhaustion, you can acknowledge that you're doing it. You're living with the contradiction. You're carrying the loss and the gain. You're making a life in the silence where the bells used to be. And that's enough. For now, for tonight, for this moment, it's enough. You're here. You're breathing. You're feeling. You're acknowledging. You're carrying what you carry. You're alive in this complicated, contradictory, exhausting, liberated world. And maybe that's all you need to do right now. Just be here. Just feel this. Just acknowledge what is. Just rest in the truth of it, complicated as it is. The bells don't ring anymore. And you're here anyway, in the silence, in the freedom, in the loneliness, in the contradiction, making a life, carrying the weight, being human. Now, here, in the space where the bells used to be. And somehow, in acknowledging all of this, in letting it be complex and unresolved and contradictory, maybe something in you softens just slightly. Maybe the struggling eases just a little. Maybe you can rest just for a moment. It's in the truth of what is, rather than the striving for what should be. You're tired. Your body knows this even when your mind won't admit it. You've been carrying this weight for a long time. The weight of creating your own structure. The weight of maintaining your own connections. The weight of being free, which is heavier than anyone tells you it's going to be. So maybe, just for now, you can set some of it down. Not solve it, not fix it, not resolve the contradiction. Just set it down for a moment. Let yourself be tired. Let yourself be lonely. Let yourself miss something you never had. Let yourself be human in all your complicated, contradictory longing. The bells don't ring anymore. And you're here. And you're tired. And you're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to miss things that were never actually good. You're allowed to long for belonging that came with costs you wouldn't want to pay. You're allowed to feel the weight of your freedom without having to justify it or solve it or make it go away. You're just allowed to feel it, to be with it, to acknowledge it, to rest in the truth of your experience, even when that truth is complicated and contradictory and doesn't resolve into a neat story with a clear moral. Your experience is that you're lonely and free, exhausted and autonomous, missing something you're glad you don't have, carrying a longing that can't be satisfied, living in the aftermath of liberation, making a life in the silence where the bells used to be. And this is hard, and this is real, and this is your life, and you're living it. You're actually doing it, even when it feels impossible. Even when you lie here at night feeling like you're dissolving into the dark. You're here, you're breathing, you're feeling, you're carrying what needs to be carried. You're making a life out of the materials you've been given, even when those materials feel insufficient, even when you wish you had something else to work with. The bells were cast from bronze and hung in towers built from stone. They rang across valleys and called people together. They created structure and rhythm and belonging. They were beautiful and terrible. They held people in place and put them in their place. They gave community and enforced conformity. They were both freedom and prison, both comfort and control. And now they're silent, and you're learning to live in that silence, learning to create your own rhythm, learning to call yourself to gathering, learning to be autonomous and exhausted, learning to be free and lonely, learning to carry the contradiction, learning to make a life without the structures that once held people in place. This is your work, invisible and exhausting and never quite done. But it's your work, and you're doing it. And maybe in this moment, in this late night, in this quiet honesty, you can acknowledge that you're doing it, that you're actually managing to live in this complicated world, that you're carrying what you carry without breaking under its weight. The bells don't ring anymore, but you're still here, still breathing, still feeling, still longing, still making a life in their absence. And maybe that's enough. Maybe you're enough. Maybe the work you're doing, invisible as it is, exhausting as it is, contradictory as it is, maybe it's enough. Maybe you can rest now. Not in resolution, but in acceptance. Not in having what you want, but in knowing what you want and why you can't have it. Not in solving the problem, but in living with it. Not in making the bells ring again, but in learning to live in their silence. You can rest now, in the quiet, in the dark, in the complicated freedom of your modern life. You can rest. You've been carrying this weight long enough for tonight. You've been thinking about it long enough. You've been struggling with it long enough. You can set it down for a while. Let your body be heavy. Let your breathing slow. Let your mind stop its circling. You understand what you understand. You feel what you feel. You carry what you carry. And for now, for tonight, that's enough. The bells don't ring. You're alone in the dark, free and tired. Autonomous and lonely, longing and grateful, human, contradictory, here. And you can rest now. Let yourself rest. Let the weight of your autonomy dissolve, just for a moment, into the softness of your bed. Let the longing for bells that will never ring again fade into the quiet of the night. Let yourself be tired without trying to fix the tiredness. Let yourself be lonely without trying to solve the loneliness. Let yourself be human, complicated, contradictory, imperfect. The bells once rang across valleys and called everyone together. Now there's just silence. And in that silence, you're learning to rest, not in structure that's given, but in the space between what was and what is, in the freedom that exhausts you, in the autonomy that isolates you, in the complicated reality of being alive now, in this moment, in this world. You can rest here, in the silence where the bells used to be, in the freedom you're grateful for and tired of, in the loneliness you understand differently now. You can rest. The night holds you even when nothing else does. The dark accepts you without judgment. The silence asks nothing of you. You can rest. Let the weight dissolve. Let the struggling stop. Let the thinking fade. You've understood enough for tonight. You've carried enough for tonight. You've acknowledged enough for tonight. Now you can rest. In the silence, in the dark, in the space where the bells used to be. You can rest. Let yourself rest. The bells don't ring. You're free. You're tired. You're here. And that's enough. For now. For tonight. For this moment. You're enough. Rest.